In the year 732, on a cold field between Tours and Poitiers, two worlds collided, and one battle would decide whether Western Europe remained Christian or became part of a rapidly expanding Islamic empire. This was not just a clash of swords and shields. It was a moment that historians would later call the line between survival and transformation, the battle that many believe ended Arab expansion in Europe. Charles Martel, the Frankish leader known as the Hammer, stood with a hardened wall of infantry against the swift and battle-tested Umayyad cavalry led by Abdul Rahman Al-Ghafiqi, and what happened that day would echo across centuries of European history. For nearly a century before that confrontation, the forces of the Umayyad Caliphate had surged out of Arabia with astonishing speed, conquering vast territories across the Middle East, North Africa, and into the Iberian Peninsula, where Muslim armies crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in 711 and swiftly toppled the Visigothic kingdom of Spain. Within a few years, Al-Andalus was established, and from there Muslim commanders began probing northward across the Pyrenees into what is now France, raiding and testing the fragmented Christian territories beyond. Europe at the time was politically divided, weakened by internal rivalries, and lacking the centralized power of the old Roman Empire, making it appear vulnerable to a determined and organized expansion. The Umayyad forces were experienced, mobile, and confident, having defeated larger and wealthier empires in the past, including the Byzantine and Persian empires. To many observers, their advance into Gaul may have seemed unstoppable. Yet in the Frankish realms, a new kind of leadership was rising under Charles Martel, the mayor of the palace who effectively ruled in place of the Merovingian kings, consolidating power, reorganizing the military, and building a disciplined infantry force that could stand firm against cavalry charges. Unlike many rulers of his time, Martel understood that survival required preparation, and he spent years strengthening his position, subduing rival factions, and ensuring that when the Muslim army advanced deep into Frankish territory in 732, he would not face them as a divided lord, but as the unified commander of a determined force. When Abdul Rahman led his troops north after a successful raid on Bordeaux, defeating Duke Odo of Aquitaine, it became clear that this was no mere border skirmish. The Muslim army was pushing deeper into the heart of Gaul, reportedly laden with plunder and seeking further dominance. Odo, having been defeated, turned to Charles Martel for aid, and despite previous conflicts between them, Martel recognized the greater threat and assembled an army drawn from across his territories, marching deliberately to intercept the invaders. He chose his ground carefully, positioning his men on elevated, wooded terrain between Tours and Poitiers, forcing the Umayyad cavalry to confront a defensive formation that would neutralize their greatest advantage: speed and maneuverability. For days, the two armies faced each other, tension thick in the autumn air, neither side eager to make the first reckless move. The Frankish soldiers, heavily armed infantry with shields and spears, formed a dense phalanx-like formation, described by chroniclers as an immovable wall of ice, disciplined and silent, while the Muslim forces, accustomed to swift assaults and open field dominance, prepared for a decisive engagement. When the fighting finally began, waves of cavalry charged the Frankish lines, but the tight infantry formation held firm, shields locked, spears braced, absorbing the impact of horse and rider with brutal resilience. The clash was fierce and chaotic, metal striking metal, men shouting in multiple tongues, horses screaming as they crashed against a defense that refused to break. Unlike previous opponents who had crumbled under cavalry pressure, Martel's troops stood their ground, their defensive strategy slowly draining the momentum of the attackers. As the battle raged into the evening, neither side achieved a clear breakthrough, but the Frankish formation remained intact, a testament to Martel's preparation and leadership. Then, according to many accounts, a critical moment shifted the tide. Rumors spread through the Muslim ranks that their camp, filled with accumulated plunder, was under threat, causing part of their force to withdraw to protect it. In the confusion, Abdul Rahman Al-Ghafiqi was killed, and with their commander fallen, cohesion faltered. Leadership in medieval warfare was often the glue that held armies together, and the loss of a respected general at such a pivotal moment could unravel even the most disciplined troops. As night fell, the Umayyad forces began to retreat, and by morning they had withdrawn entirely, leaving the field to Charles Martel. Though the Frankish army did not pursue aggressively, the message was clear: the advance had been halted. This was not merely a tactical victory, but a strategic turning point. signaling that the northward expansion from Al-Andalus would face formidable resistance. In the years that followed, Muslim forces would remain in parts of southern France for a time, but the large-scale push into the heart of Western Europe had been checked. The Battle of Tours, also known as the Battle of Poitiers, became a symbol in later European chronicles of a civilization defended, a moment when a determined stand preserved the cultural and religious trajectory of a continent. Historians continue to debate the scale and long-term impact of the battle, some arguing that its importance was amplified by later writers seeking a dramatic narrative of Christian survival, while others maintain that it genuinely marked a decisive boundary to Umayyad ambitions in the region. What cannot be denied is that the encounter elevated Charles Martel's prestige immensely, laying the groundwork for the Carolingian dynasty and ultimately for his grandson Charlemagne, who would be crowned emperor and reshape medieval Europe. The victory strengthened Frankish unity, reinforced the authority of Martel's line, and contributed to the emerging identity of Western Christendom as a distinct political and cultural sphere. For the Umayyad Caliphate, internal challenges and shifting priorities elsewhere also influenced the limits of expansion, but the stiff resistance in Gaul demonstrated that further conquest northward would not be swift or simple. The battlefield between Tours and Poitiers thus became more than a geographic location. It represented a crossroads of empires, faiths, and futures. In examining this battle, one must move beyond simplistic narratives of inevitable destiny and recognize the complexity of the forces at play: logistics, terrain, leadership, morale, and the broader geopolitical currents shaping both sides. The Muslim forces in Iberia were far from defeated as a civilization. Al-Andalus would flourish for centuries as a center of culture, science, and learning, influencing Europe in profound ways, even as political boundaries solidified. Meanwhile, the Frankish realm continued to evolve, forging institutions and alliances that would define medieval Western Europe. The confrontation in 732 did not end interaction between the Islamic world and Europe. Rather, it marked the end of one phase of rapid territorial expansion into Gaul and the beginning of a more stabilized frontier. Yet, in the imagination of generations, the image endured of armored infantry standing unbroken against thundering cavalry, of a hammer striking a decisive blow, of a moment when history seemed to pause and pivot. The Battle of Tours remains a powerful reminder that history often turns not only on grand empires and sweeping movements, but on the resolve of individuals and the outcomes of single days of relentless struggle.